I'm Michael Essa, and I'm going to take this 2016 340i and turn it into a drift car. Every single component on the car, besides the shocks, are made by WiseFab. There's tons of adjustability in this. We've got a lot of range to move all of the arms, toe links, everything to basically set the ride height on the car where we want it and get the toe curve and camber curve set to how we want the car to work. They've already built in a lot of geometry to make the car have actually more grip and work better and more consistently. These are the front knuckles, the lower control arms, which are quite a bit different than the factory ones. Run two separate links to the hub. This one's converted to a single pivot point on the lower ball joint. It makes everything a lot simpler, and it's easier to work on if something happens to the car. Really stout and very good design. I'm looking forward to getting this on the car and seeing how it all works. Bilstein just sent us this Evo R kit. Almost every single suspension component, including the rear subframe, is actually identical to the new Supra. Since it's almost identical to an A90, this is going to work out really well for us. We can change a few things on it to make the WiseFab parts fit. These things are really nice. Big, easy to adjust knobs. Every click actually makes quite a big difference in how the car handles. A range of 10 different settings, just 1 to 2 clicks of change are going to make a big difference. Have it set up the way you want it to work at a certain track or even on the street. These camber plates here are super nice, but we're going to have to replace them. WiseFab camber plates, which are also super nice. Inside of the Formula Drift rulebook, there's specifications on exactly how much you can move this. Stock would be like right in the middle. With the rulebook, we have to stay within the bolt circle. If you use their camber plates, everything bolts up perfectly. We're going to get these swapped out and make sure everything fits properly. We might have to make some bushings for it, but we'll see. Helper spring here, sometimes called a tender, and this basically just makes sure that when the car is up in the air, this spring doesn't bounce around and go sideways, so that kind of keeps it locked in place. It also helps with rebound. If the car gets air going over a jump or something like that, it helps push the shock down towards the ground and keep that wheel planted with the surface. Awesome, it's the right size. WiseFab is basically making it fit onto a stock shock, and it's got a bearing in here. This bearing can just do angle, and this bearing will do all the twist. As the spring compresses, it's actually twisting. If you don't have anything that wants to move, you got a bunch of friction here. This is trying to bind up, and it doesn't want to move through its stroke as well. Taking all the bind out of the suspension makes a big difference. I'll just make sure all this fits correctly before we put the springs on it. Once the springs are on here and all the pressure is on the top hat, you're not gonna be able to tell if the spring is pushing against it and making it feel tight, or it's actually the correct height on that nut. Cool. Cool. A template here that basically shows us where we need to cut to allow for this to go into the chassis. There's that little bit of a notch that we need to do there. Like, I thought building race cars was easy. All right, let's see how this fits on the car. I figured that the dotted lines were where the car already was, since that was the only bit of solid line the template had. But just before we cut into the car, I figured I'd double check and get it right the first time. Looks like I might need to just grind a little bit more on this side.
Yeah.
Same as both of the edges on this one. That's the difference right there. I'll have to make another one of these sleeves to fit this body. This is an A90 Super Kit, and we've got the Bilstein stuff from an F30. So, you know, everything is custom on this build, but luckily we have a lathe, and I don't know if I have the material right now, but that's not a big deal to make a spacer. Front and rear cross members. We sent them across the street to a chemical stripping place. Basically, they removed all of the paint. We mounted the WiseFab parts on here. So this is a steering rack relocation kit that they make for the F30 chassis. This is actually going to allow us to use an E90 steering rack, which is a standard hydraulic steering rack, because the one that comes in the F30 is actually an electric steering rack. We could possibly make work for drifting, but it's gonna take a lot of time. This is already proven. We know how these racks work, how the hydraulic systems work, so this will just simplify everything and make spare parts a lot easier to find and cheaper. And this is the rear. Modified it quite a bit, actually, at Bink Industries. They have a jig to do a quick change rear subframe for an A90 Supra. Checked it out, this bolted into the jig. Nate over there gave us all the components and allowed me to build this rear subframe. Helped us out quite a bit and saved a lot of time instead of having to figure out how to mount that diff and make all these parts. He's actually got the design in SolidWorks, and he cuts all of these parts out on his plasma table. He can build the whole subframe basically in a jig, have it repeatable so it's the same every single time. Last week we got most of the cage installed, pretty much everything tacked in place. It is almost completely welded in. I have to do a little more welding on the base plates. It looks really good. Everything fit perfectly. Really happy with how it came out. Now we've started getting other stuff ready to do some mock-up in the rear suspension. So we got the subframe ready to go with all the WiseFab parts bolted on. We'll stick it in the car, and then we're gonna put wheels on it, check the wheel travel, and then we're gonna have to cut the quarter panels out, make room for the wheels, because they're gonna be a lot wider, higher offset than the original wheels. We've got a big body kit from Street Fighter LA that's going over it, figure out exactly where we need to cut, and also check the shock travel, just make sure that there's nothing that's interfering with anything on the chassis to the suspension or wheels hitting the chassis. So here's the spacers that I just made. Since these are off of an A90 Supra, they're smaller in diameter than what comes on an F30. This one's not completely done yet. I still have to cut a slit in the back of it, but I made them extra long, basically to push the shock and the spindle apart a bit, which is gonna give us more droop. I wanna make sure we don't have to cut more off of this. Once I figure that out, I'll cut these down to match, machine this one as well. If we get the wheel on here and the wheel touches the chassis before we use all the shock stroke, we can use more droop in the car, especially on a drift car, because we like a lot of suspension travel to get the car to work well. We're kind of at the limit. We've got about 10 millimeters more that we can add and still have a good capture of the body of the shock here. Once we put it all together, we get a better idea of what exactly is going on and what we're gonna measure and check. That's why we pull the springs off here also, so we can compress this all the way easily without having to compress that heavy spring. We got these parts from AKG, rear subframe bushing set, a two-piece, which makes them a lot easier to install. The single-piece ones, you've got to put them in a press and press them in, and then you can't get them out if you want to do anything to the subframe, or if we damage a subframe we need to replace it, we can just swap these over. They fit loose right now, but once we put powder coat on the subframe, they'll just be nice and snug. And we also got their engine mounts. So these are not completely solid, but they're very, very stiff urethane, so we can get just a little bit of movement from the engine in between the chassis. It's going to dampen some of the vibrations from the engine. That's their engine mount, and that's the original engine mount. So it's cast aluminum with a hydraulic rubber bushing inside of there. Allows a lot of movement. Not good on a race car. Machined perfectly, looks really nice. I think that's going to hold all the power that we want to make, but still allow for just that little bit of movement so we don't break anything. These are the brake rotors. They ship to us. So these are Zimmerman rotors, very nice and a lot less expensive than the original BMW rotors. Fully coated so they don't rust. Basically all this will stay coated and the brake pads will just wipe off this coating. You don't have to sand it or do anything to it. A lot of aftermarket rotors will warp when they get hot. You'll get a big vibration in the pedal and they're basically trash. You got to get new rotors. These ones are really well made. They don't warp even with race pads under racing conditions. All right, there we go. There's the front. So these are actually off of a E90, E92 M3. WiseFab angle kit uses E90 M3 or standard E90 brake calipers and rotors, so you can go with either or. We went with the M3 stuff to have a little more braking power. I'm just going to flop around a little bit since we don't have a tie rod on here. That's fine for checking clearance. So it's tire contacting the chassis right now. Super low. The tire is like only probably an inch, or the chassis is only about an inch higher than where the tire sits right now. That's definitely all the travel that we're going to use. Even as the suspension compresses, it's all clear this way. When you're building a drift car with a big angle kit and wide wheels and tires, that it's going to contact some brackets, and even sometimes you have to cut the back of the headlights out a little bit. This kind of stuff we're allowed to remove. We can even cut sections of this off if we need to. That's no big deal. There's a lip here. We might have to hammer that over. If we need to hammer this up or roll this lip a little more, we can do that, and that's all legal. We just can't cut into any parts of the chassis. And there's some pretty cool stuff that WiseFab has. This is actually an adjustable steering stop. If you have wider wheels or something on your car and you've got tire contacting chassis somewhere, you can actually loosen this thing, rotate it, and put it at a higher setting. With that adjustable steering lock, you can set it up for your car, your wheels, your spacers, tire size. So that's a pretty cool feature. All these shims here are for adjusting the Ackerman. Pop these in here. This hole is slotted. The tie rod connects here, and the more you push the tie rod out, this line from this point to the rear diff gets closer. That's more Ackerman that a street car would have. In a drift car, we want close to zero, maybe a little bit of Ackerman to have a good steering feel. With the front wheels pointing where we want to go and the back of the car sliding, if you have a lot of Ackerman, it gives you good steering feel. You have really good steering return. You're losing front grip there, and you're also slowing the car down. So you can have a zero Ackerman setup, a 1/4 inch or so, maybe a 1/2 inch of toe out depending on the car, and that will act like some Ackerman and help the steering and help the wheel self-center when you let go of the wheel. So we'll do a quick check before we put any the wheel or anything else on. Basically see everything moves up. It will never travel that far. Everything else looks really clear and cycles through nice and easy. These are only 265s, and we're gonna run 295s. It's quite a bit smaller, but it'll work for initial mock-up. You can see how much this is sticking out. We're gonna have to cut a lot.
It's perfect.
That's it.
Now, if you're not rubbing right here, you're doing it wrong.
About 30 degrees of camber, and this will all work. I knew it was gonna hit, but I wanted to get an idea of how the wheel moves. Sometimes the wheels will move almost straight up and down. Sometimes they'll pull forward. Sometimes they'll roll backwards. We can kind of taper it, get bigger as we go up. That'll help do like the initial cut. You know, if we were gonna do it before, we'd probably cut all the way out here and then realize later on that we didn't need to do all that. And takes away, you know, a lot of strength right here. If this will be a lot stronger if we don't cut all of that out. Now we'll get the quarter panels, mark it out, and see how high we can cut, and then also we'll follow the inside sheet metal as well. So it's basically be nice big flat tubs in there, and we'll have room for a big tire to move all the way up. a good thing it's not painted yet. I made this tool to mark out where I wanted to cut the rear quarter panels. This follows the inside of the wheel well. There's a big flat spot in almost all cars. Made this, hold a Sharpie. Then I just go through here, follow the flat spot, and I can draw where we need to cut. Need a shower now. If we get a bigger radius tire in there, it's definitely going to hit that. We need to do more trimming in the rear. I was just trying to leave this tab here, but we could always weld something on there later if we need to. So that's all the travel we're going to be able to get out of it. It's going to look good. I have to make mounts for the top of the shocks. That way I can make them the right length. Make sure that the shock is going to hit the bump stops before it ever gets this much travel. So we don't have tire to suspension or tire to the chassis, because that basically will destroy a tire. You could break an axle or something. It's like grabbing the e-brake and being full throttle at the same time. So we're at 11 inches there. 4 3/4. That's 15 3/4. That's right where we need to be. Ah! I'll get most of the fabrication stuff done on the inside. Got to figure out how we're going to mount the steering column. Still haven't decided if I'm going to use the stock steering column that has all the adjustability. It's telescoping and it moves up and down. It's a pretty nice piece. I think we might be able to use it if we can get it to fit in right. Figure out exactly where the ECU is going to go. Once this is here, we know that the wires are going to go down to the transmission for the shift force and the gear position for the Samsonis transmission. When Greg comes by to do the wiring, he can measure everything out to those points of where we're going to drill the holes for the bulkhead, like the mil-spec connectors. Position the fuel cell in there so we can get all the measurements to that. After the bulk of that stuff is done, drop the engine in with the manifold, turbo and everything bolted onto it, and see where everything's going to fit, and if we have to modify anything else for clearance. Bolt the wastegates on. We might have to cut a section of this off. We decided to go with the Doc Race B58 manifold. It's a 6-port Supra manifold, and it moves the turbo a little bit farther forward than the one they make for this F30 chassis. Turbo position is really tight here. The runners aren't all the same length, but the Supra one that Doc Race makes is all equal length, because they can position it in the right spot. It fits in a Supra, and we can cut stuff out of this car. With that manifold, it's going to flow more, so we can make more power without having to really stress out the engine and the turbo by turning up the boost. All the little things that we can do to get more power more efficiently. Lots of little stuff that we're going to have to figure out, but basically we need to get the engine in there first, see exactly where that's going to sit with the turbo and the turbo manifold on it, and then we can go from there.